Good afternoon. I'm Betsy. I'm one of the 2 Olmsted scholars in this year's Fellows cohort, and I'm excited to share with you the culmination of my research this year, the Biodiversity Victory Gardens Project, sharing ways for anyone and everyone to help stem biodiversity decline from home. My research is inspired by this garden, Great Dixter, that I visited shortly after moving to the UK a couple years ago. This is no ordinary ornamental garden. It's bursting with life. You can see the medieval structures in the center surrounded by managed meadows, then garden spaces packed full of diversity. It's quite stark when compared to the pastoral landscape beyond. That's because Fergus Garrett, head gardener, and his team have turned their deep plant knowledge and horticultural skills to gardening for biodiversity. They want to show that cultivated gardens aren't sterile. They can be beneficial to wildlife. They commissioned a biodiversity audit on the property to help guide their efforts. Fergus talks about how they had to fight for years to get one done because no one took them seriously. So he enticed some entomologists to have a meeting on property, and during a lunch break they wandered around and happened to find 77 species just on the compost heap and a rare beetle on the front garden gate. He says they were practically foaming at the mouth to do this audit. And they came back, and in 2019, the audit was published, showing that the cultivated gardens were more biodiverse than the meadows on site, home to over 2,000 species and growing. This is valuable habitat. I left Dixter inspired to make spaces like this, wanting to distill the complex work happening here to simple steps an average person with no horticultural training could take from home, like these gorgeous borders designed to have a long bloom season, providing food for insects throughout the year when surrounding areas have little to offer. This made me question, what would these planting and maintenance practices look like translated on a smaller scale? And would they have a similar positive effect for biodiversity? Could simply helping people shift from this to this, or even to this, amount to significant change? Or is the scale too small to make a difference? So that's what I set out to find this year. We're experiencing a biodiversity crisis. Can our gardens help? To answer that question, let's start with covering what's happening to our biodiversity. I'm going to ask you to take a moment and bring to mind a road trip you took as a child. Maybe it was a trip to visit grandparents or head to the beach or go on a sports tournament. After a couple hours, did you have to pull off at a refuel station because your windshield looked like this? Now think about the last time you had to pull over to clear bugs from your windshield to continue your trip. I personally can't think of the last time I used a squeegee at a gas station. This is referred to as the windshield phenomenon and is one of the only ways we can witness and feel the loss of the species around us. I was shocked and a bit embarrassed at the beginning of this fellowship year that I didn't know more about the biodiversity crisis. But apparently I'm not alone. We often don't notice species declining because of something psychologists call shifting baseline syndrome. This is recognized as one of the largest challenges to overcome in order to address the environmental crises of the day, climate and biodiversity crises included. Think of this like environmental amnesia. We inherit a degraded environment and accept it as normal, as what's always been. The issue is, if you're not aware your ecosystem is depleted, then there's no move to restoration. But just because it's hard for us to see the change does not mean it's not happening. Since the 1970s, species have declined across the globe by 69%. That's nearly 70% in just 50 years. The loss is so drastic that scientists have deemed this the 6th mass species extinction event in Earth's history. But this one is unique. It's the first not caused by asteroids or natural disaster. It's caused by us, by humans. It's also unique because it's the first time that insects seem to be impacted. They arrived on the scene more than 450 million years ago and survived the past 5 extinctions relatively unscathed. But today, they're declining more quickly than any other species. Insects have dropped by 41% across the globe in the past decade alone. That's double than the decline of species of birds and other vertebrates. One of the most cited examples of insect decline is the Crefeld study, which made headlines across the globe and led to feature articles like this New York Magazine article. An entomological society in Krefeld, Germany, found that insects declined by 75% over just 20 years. It's an incredibly fast drop in ecological time, and the loss was seen in nature reserves, the very places we lean on to preserve our species. I found this study shocking, not only because of the data, but because of the fact that it was amateur scientists that conducted this study and alerted the scientific community of the insect decline. I learned that's true of most of the long-term data sets on insects. They come from citizen scientists like this group. Insects have been overlooked and under-researched, and it's time to pay attention. Our world will look very different without insects. I'm sure many of you are thinking, great, no mosquitoes. But just 1% of insects are classified as pests. The rest are, like these pictured, responsible for pollination, decomposition, aerating soil. They make up 2/3 of the world's species. For example, there are as many ladybug species in the world as mammals. Because they're so numerous, they're intricately involved in all freshwater and terrestrial food webs. So concern with insects is not just about the extinction of one species. It's this loss in abundance. E.O. Wilson is often quoted saying, "If all mankind were to disappear, the world would regenerate back to the rich state of equilibrium that existed 10,000 years ago. If insects were to vanish, the environment would collapse into chaos." So what does this chaos look like? If our insects disappeared, 90% of the flowering plants would go with them, as they rely on a variety of insects, not just bees and butterflies, to pollinate them. This means our medium as landscape architects would be gone, and a bit more pressing, so would our food supply. So what's causing species decline? Scientists are still debating the specific reason, but most studies cite 4 top causes, all due to humans. The first is habitat loss due to intensive agriculture and urbanization, basically taking complexity and creating monocultures. Second is pollution, mainly due to synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. This is not just an issue on our agricultural fields. A USDA report found that homeowners and city dwellers apply more insecticide per acre than farmers. And I'm going to pause here for a moment because I think this one is really important. As landscape architects and home gardeners, we should be aware that even if you don't have a spray bottle, you may be introducing poisonous chemicals into your space. A study done at the University of Sussex in 2017 screened garden center plants for pesticides, and 97% of the plants labeled as bee-friendly contained at least one pesticide, with most containing neonicotinoid insecticides. It's a long word, but neonicotinoid insecticides are banned in much of the globe because they're 7,000 times more toxic than DDT. They're cited as one of the main reasons of pollinator decline, but they're legal here in the United States. We should revisit Rachel Carson's message in her book, Silent Spring, because these biocides, as she referred to them, are very much still present in our world today. The third is introduced species, so invasive plants and animals. It's happening more frequently in our globalized world. And finally, climate change. So, it's a lot of data. What can we do about it? We typically think of nature reserves as the way to combat species decline, like the Great Smoky Mountains pictured here. Nature reserves are vital for a megafauna, or big species, to thrive. But these spaces are just one piece of the restoration puzzle. That's because nature reserves are essentially islands of habitat, surrounded by typically less habitable cities and farms. Islands have a limited carrying capacity for species, and when isolated, species trend toward decline. This is referred to by scientists as the theory of island biogeography. What this means is basically the number of species an island can hold is determined by 2 factors. 1, the size of the piece of land, and 2, by the proximity to other bits of habitat. We often focus on the size, conserving large tracts of land and thinking that's the job done. But this theory tells us that islands are only as good as the network of which they are a part. They need species coming in and out through corridors to thrive. We've been fixated on this scale and have neglected habitat outside of these spaces, further isolating this habitat and participating in fortress conservation. We build cities and grow food and think of it as separate from nature, but the truth is these habitat islands can't support species on their own. Nature should be part of the equation at all of these scales. The good news is there are lots of ways to help, and many of you in this room are already doing the work. You're increasing connectivity and complexity in our world through coastal habitat projects like Living Breakwaters. You're packing parks with diverse habitat like Elephant Park in London. You're connecting habitat cores over infrastructural barriers like the Landbridge Memorial Park in Houston. Or you're enlivening underused spaces like this rooftop in central London. But even among these big and sexy projects and nature reserves, I want you to know that your tiny yard matters. This figure ground mapping shows why our gardens matter. You'll see the black space with developed areas, and black space is habitat and green space, and the developed areas are the white space in between. So the dark spaces are public parks or cemeteries or a string of waterways that act as these habitat cores within this particular city. And they will remain islands supporting less species unless we work together to activate all this white space in between, the homes and backyards that we have overlooked when it comes to ecological infrastructure. As you can see, private gardens and community gardens are often the only spaces for miles in a city that can connect these larger cores. And just look at the corridors our backyards make. I think it's time to unleash the potential in the home and community gardens, and there's a vast amount of potential. There are 1.2 million acres of gardens in the UK. That's an area larger than all the nature reserves combined. And as our world becomes increasingly more urbanized, it's becoming more important to make these spaces habitable for other species, not just us. Despite our best efforts, our backyards are often death traps for insects. We have removed shelter from the elements and predators, replaced it with lawn, and then doused the space with poison. In the US, there are 60 million acres of lawn devoid of diversity, more than all the US cornfields combined. We can do better. What an opportunity to reclaim habitat. So I'm launching the Biodiversity Victory Garden Project to share the simple things we can do to make our backyards better for biodiversity. The project gets its name from the Victory Garden movement, where the US and the UK mobilized people during World War I and II to supplement war rationings by growing food at home. They disseminated posters and pamphlets to share tips and inspiration, and it worked. It was so successful that by 1945, 40% of all food consumed in the US was grown in victory gardens. I believe this is a powerful example that shows that big change is possible in these small spaces. The BVG project will focus on this micro scale and micro species. Work in these larger scales have lots of barriers to change, and progress can be slow, but home gardens can change tomorrow. And with top-down global approaches failing to improve the situation for decades, there's urgency to act now. And there's so much we can do, or more often than not, simply stop doing to make a difference. I saw many ideas on my research road trip to gardens across the UK that I can't wait to share. Design details that double as hubs for biodiversity, management strategies like simply leaving the leaves where they are or allowing bare patches of sunny soil to remain for nesting bees. I'll give you one last example that captures the essence of how small this shift can be and how big of an impact it can have. Did you know you could be stuffing your garden full of plants, but starving your species? This is because when it comes to insects that eat plants, about 90% of them are specialists. We talked about how insects have been around for more than 400 million years. Well, during that time, they've evolved alongside plants and shaped each other. Many have formed specialist relationships, which means they can only breed on one plant lineage. The monarch butterfly is the classic example. They lay their eggs on the only plant that caterpillars will eat, milkweed. So this is called a larval host plant, so no milkweed, no monarch. Simply adding these plants to your garden will ensure there's food for the full life cycle of these species. Focus on planting for specialists, so pulling from your native plant palette can have a huge impact. The information is out there in the gardens I visited, but also in many articles and books that taught me so much this year. But I believe we need to make this information more accessible, offer new, fun ways to share it. So I plan to bring these ideas to life in various poster series. The first coming out later this year is Pollinator Pantones, to raise awareness about all things pollinators. The series will showcase the different spectrum of colored flowers that different species are drawn to, like this palette here for bees, dominated by yellows and purples because bees don't see the color red. There will be a poster for the other lesser-known species we rely on for pollination, like beetles, flies, and wasps. The poster campaigns will be activated via social media to help inspire action, connect people to existing resources, and simply create more awareness. Because awareness is where change starts. Remember the shifting baseline syndrome? The biggest challenge to combating the biodiversity crisis? The first step toward overcoming this roadblock to change is with what we did today. Learn about the problem and how we got here. This awareness leads to restoration, which leads to monitoring, which leads to sharing lessons learned and repeating the process. These are the 4 pillars that guide the Biodiversity Victory Garden project. These categories offer many ways to help. Simple actions for busy folks to make a difference, because we can make a difference, one pot at a time. Thank you.